Imagine waking up to find billions of dollars vanishing from banks around the world without a single vault being touched or alarms being triggered. A shadowy cybercrime gang, armed with nothing but code and cunning, pulled off one of the most sophisticated bank heists in history. They didn't just steal money, they manipulated the very systems designed to protect it. Over 5 years, their operations spread across 40 countries, leaving law enforcement baffled and the world's financial systems vulnerable. But who were they? How did they do it? And what happened when the chase finally caught up to them? Stay tuned. Chapter 1. The Birth of the Carbanak Gang. The story of the Carbanak gang begins in the early 2010s during a period when cybercrime was rapidly evolving. Unlike traditional hackers who focused on personal data theft or low-level fraud, this group aimed much higher. They targeted banks directly. The gang's name, Carbanak, originated from the combination of Carburp, a notorious malware they initially modified, and Anunak, another name associated with their operations. Carbanak emerged from a tight-knit group of Russian-speaking hackers. These individuals were highly skilled in programming, malware creation, and social engineering. Many of them were believed to have prior experience in hacking forums and underground cybercriminal networks. They began by experimenting with smaller-scale attacks on businesses, testing their tools, and refining their methods. Over time, their ambitions grew, and they shifted their focus to financial institutions. Unlike typical cybercriminals seeking quick monetary gains, Carbanak's members envisioned a long-term, systematic approach to hacking. Their goal was not just to steal money, but to exploit vulnerabilities in banking systems on a global scale. They realized that instead of targeting individuals, infiltrating the internal networks of banks could yield massive rewards. The gang operated like a professional organization with specific roles for each member. Developers created and refined the malware used for infiltrating systems. Social engineers specialized in crafting phishing emails and luring employees into clicking malicious links. Network specialists focused on breaching internal bank networks and maintaining undetected access. Money mules operated on the ground to withdraw cash or transfer stolen funds into offshore accounts or cryptocurrencies. Carbanak drew inspiration from earlier cybercriminal groups, such as the operators of the Zeus and Carburp malware. They analyzed how these groups executed their attacks and improved upon their strategies. The gang modified the Carburp malware, integrating advanced techniques to create their custom tool, which became the backbone of their operations. Before adopting the Carbanak name, the gang operated under the alias Anunak. During this phase, they targeted smaller financial institutions and payment processors. These initial attacks served as a training ground, allowing them to refine their techniques and build confidence. The gang's first significant attack involved breaching a mid-sized Eastern European bank. Using a phishing email, they tricked an employee into installing malware, granting them access to the bank's internal systems. Over several weeks, they monitored the bank's operations, gathering critical information. Eventually, they manipulated the bank's software to siphon funds into dummy accounts without raising suspicion. By 2014, the gang adopted the name Carbanak, reflecting their evolution into a sophisticated criminal enterprise. This rebranding signaled their transition from small-scale heists to a global operation targeting some of the world's largest financial institutions. Chapter 2. The Rise of Cyber Heist. In the early 2010s, global cybercrime was dominated by ransomware, phishing scams, and credit card fraud. However, Carbanak introduced a revolutionary approach by targeting banking systems directly. Instead of exploiting end users, they breached the internal frameworks of financial institutions, aiming to exploit vulnerabilities in the very heart of these systems. The gang was strategic in choosing their targets. Their initial focus was on smaller and mid-sized financial institutions across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. These banks often lacked the advanced cybersecurity measures of larger institutions, making them easier to infiltrate. Key factors in target selection included weak security systems, banks with outdated software or insufficient monitoring, geographical accessibility, institutions in countries with less stringent cybersecurity laws, potential impact, targets where significant financial disruption could be caused without immediate detection. Carbanak's techniques during this phase showcased their ingenuity. Unlike conventional hackers who focused on transferring funds directly, they manipulated internal systems in ways that blended seamlessly with normal operations. Some of their groundbreaking strategies included they programmed specific ATMs to dispense large sums of cash at predetermined times. A gang member stationed near the machine collected the money without triggering any alarms. They altered bank records to reflect false balances. Funds were siphoned into dummy accounts that appeared legitimate on paper. Using their malware, they issued unauthorized SWIFT transfers to move money internationally. These transactions often involved offshore accounts, making them harder to trace. At this stage, Carbanak began deploying measures to evade detection. They used a network of proxy servers and VPNs to mask their digital footprints. Moreover, they frequently changed their malware's code to avoid being flagged by antivirus software. Their malware was so advanced that even when detected, it often required weeks of analysis to understand fully. Chapter 3. Unleashing phishing attacks. A phishing attack involves tricking a target into performing an action that compromises their system, such as clicking a malicious link or downloading a harmful file. Carbanak elevated this tactic to an art form by combining meticulous research, realistic email designs, and custom-built malware. Before launching a phishing campaign, Carbanak conducted extensive research on their targets. This reconnaissance phase involved the gang studied employees' LinkedIn profiles to identify roles and responsibilities within the organization. They tracked public posts to understand ongoing projects or upcoming deadlines. Company websites and press releases provided insights into organizational hierarchies and partnerships. Online directories or leaked databases often revealed email addresses or contact details. In some cases, Carbanak intercepted ongoing email conversations between employees. They inserted themselves into these threads, replying as if they were legitimate participants. Carbanak used multiple strategies to ensure their phishing emails bypassed spam filters and reached their intended targets. Instead of sending emails from random addresses, they often hacked email accounts within the same industry. Emails originating from a known and trusted sender were more likely to be opened. Attachments disguised as invoices, contracts, or project files carried their custom malware. File formats like PDFs, Word documents, and Excel spreadsheets with macros were commonly used. Some emails directed recipients to fake websites designed to mimic the bank's internal login portals. Once credentials were entered, the gang gained unauthorized access. The effectiveness of Carbanak's phishing campaigns was alarming. Studies of their methods revealed that nearly 20% of employees targeted by their emails opened them, and around 5 to 10% executed the malware payloads. Carbanak adapted their phishing strategies over time to counter improved cybersecurity measures. By 2015, they began using encrypted payloads that were only decrypted once inside the target system. They also exploited zero-day vulnerabilities in widely used software to increase the chances of success. Chapter 4. Inside the bank's network. After deploying their malware via a phishing email, Carbanak established a foothold in the target's network. This initial access point was usually the computer of a bank employee. From there, the gang moved cautiously to avoid detection. Once inside, Carbanak didn't immediately steal money. Instead, they took time to study the bank's internal processes. This patience was one of their most defining characteristics and set them apart from other cybercriminals. The gang observed employee workflows, such as how transactions were approved, who had access to certain systems, and the timing of daily tasks. This phase often lasted several weeks or even months, depending on the complexity of the bank's operations. Carbanak's malware had a feature that allowed them to control internal webcams and surveillance cameras. They used this to watch employees handling critical tasks, such as authorizing large transfers or loading cash orders into the system. They intercepted emails and chat logs to gain insight into the bank's policies and detect potential vulnerabilities. These communications also revealed key decision-makers and the approval processes they followed. Carbanak's ultimate goal was to compromise the bank's core systems, which controlled its most critical functions, including these systems processed internal and external money transfers. By gaining control, Carbanak could manipulate transaction amounts and recipients without triggering alarms. The gang targeted the SWIFT international payment system to initiate unauthorized transfers across borders. They used this to send funds to accounts in countries with lax financial oversight. Carbanak infiltrated infiltrated systems that managed ATM operations, programming specific machines to dispense cash at set times. These withdrawals were synchronized with local operatives, ensuring the stolen money was collected quickly. Chapter 5. Surveillance and Reconnaissance. Surveillance was at the core of Carbanak's strategy. Unlike traditional hackers who relied solely on technical exploits, Carbanak combined technological prowess with behavioral observation. This allowed them to uncover vulnerabilities not only in systems, but also in human behavior. Their primary objectives during surveillance included understanding how employees interacted with banking systems, identifying key decision-makers and their roles in authorizing transactions, learning daily routines to exploit predictable patterns. Carbanak's ability to monitor bank operations in real time gave them a significant advantage. This capability allowed them to respond immediately to any changes in the environment. They used remote desktop features to observe employees interacting with systems in real time. This provided a live tutorial on how to operate complex banking applications. By mimicking employee actions, they ensured that their commands appeared as routine tasks. For example, they manually approved fraudulent transactions to bypass automated checks. The gang waited for moments when systems were most vulnerable, such as during peak hours or end-of-day reconciliations. They exploited these windows to initiate large transfers or cash withdrawals without arousing suspicion. Examples of successful reconnaissance: Carbanak monitored the bank's accounting department for 3 months, learning how they reconciled daily transactions. This information allowed them to manipulate records during a major heist, ensuring discrepancies went unnoticed until it was too late. By observing employees responsible for ATM maintenance, they learned the schedules for cash replenishment. This insight enabled them to time their ATM jacking operations for maximum payouts. Chapter 6. Manipulating Banking Systems. Carbanak developed malware that could seamlessly integrate with various types of banking software. Their tools were not generic. Instead, they were modified for each target's unique systems. After observing employees using the software, Carbanak analyzed its architecture to identify vulnerabilities. They disassembled applications to understand their code and functionality, allowing them to exploit specific flaws. The malware was programmed to execute specific tasks, such as transferring funds, modifying account balances, or approving unauthorized transactions. Commands were executed dynamically, meaning they adapted to the bank's operational environment in real time. Carbanak targeted the back-end modules that handled money transfers, payroll processing, and account reconciliations. By injecting their commands directly into these systems, they ensured their actions appeared legitimate. Notable examples of system manipulation. Carbanak manipulated the bank's accounting systems to issue fraudulent loans. These loans were funneled through multiple accounts before being withdrawn. Over $7 million was stolen in a single night by forcing ATMs across multiple cities to dispense cash simultaneously. The operation was coordinated with local operatives, ensuring quick collection. The gang exploited the bank's payroll system to send inflated salaries to dummy accounts. These funds were then transferred out within hours. Chapter 7. The Big Heist: From Accounts to ATMs. The cash-out phase was the climax of Carbanak's operation. After successfully infiltrating the bank's systems and manipulating data, the gang focused on withdrawing the stolen funds through both bank accounts and ATMs. Carbanak used their control over bank systems to orchestrate the movement of funds across accounts, masking the origin of stolen money and making it harder to trace. Accounts were created with fake identities or under the names of unsuspecting individuals. These accounts acted as temporary holding points before funds were withdrawn or transferred further. To avoid detection, large sums were split into smaller, seemingly routine transactions. The money was moved between multiple accounts in different regions or countries to obscure the trail. They identified inactive or low-activity accounts within the bank and used them to temporarily hold stolen funds. These accounts were selected because they were less likely to be closely monitored. Stolen funds were transferred to accounts in countries with lax financial regulations. Offshore shell companies were often used to facilitate these transfers. The most dramatic element of Carbanak's heists was their ability to make ATMs dispense cash on command. This method allowed them to extract large sums without raising immediate suspicion. Carbanak issued commands to targeted ATMs via compromised bank networks. The ATMs were programmed to dispense the maximum allowed cash in a single transaction repeatedly until they were emptied. Local operatives, often referred to as money mules, were stationed near the targeted ATMs. These individuals collected the cash as it was dispensed, sometimes even using backpacks or bags to carry large sums. Cash outs were often conducted during weekends, holidays, or late at night when bank staff were unavailable to respond quickly. The gang synchronized multiple ATMs across different cities or countries to maximize their haul. They bypassed withdrawal limits and disabled alarms by exploiting vulnerabilities in the ATM's configuration files. In some cases, ATMs were forced to dispense cash without requiring a card or PIN. Even during the final phase, Carbanak ensured their actions avoided triggering alarms or raising suspicion. Withdrawals and transfers were carefully timed to mimic regular banking activity. This prevented large spikes in activity that might trigger automated fraud detection systems. By leveraging different banking and ATM networks, they ensured no single institution bore the brunt of the attack. This distributed approach diluted the chances of swift detection. Local operatives were instructed to blend in, often dressed as ordinary customers or bank maintenance workers. This reduced the likelihood of security personnel noticing unusual activity near targeted ATMs. Case study: the multi-city ATM breach. In one of Carbanak's most infamous operations, they targeted ATMs in multiple cities across Eastern Europe. Over 50 ATMs were remotely instructed to dispense cash simultaneously. Money mules collected the cash within minutes of each ATM dispensing. By the time banks realized something was wrong, Carbanak had emptied over $8 million from their machines. The gang had used disposable mobile phones to coordinate the operation, making it nearly impossible to trace communications. Chapter 8: Crossing Borders, Global Expansion. To successfully operate on a global scale, Carbanak conducted thorough research on the financial systems of different countries. They focused on countries with large financial sectors and minimal cybersecurity infrastructure. Key targets included banks in developing nations where security protocols were often outdated, and those in major financial hubs where the potential for large payouts was greater. Carbanak studied each country's banking regulations to identify loopholes. In countries with weak oversight or slow regulatory enforcement, they could operate longer without detection. They ensured their malware and techniques were adaptable to the diverse banking software and systems used across regions. This adaptability allowed them to infiltrate banks in Asia, Europe, the Americas, and Africa with the same basic framework. One of Carbanak's most innovative strategies was their exploitation of global payment networks. The gang infiltrated SWIFT terminals to initiate fraudulent international transfers. By exploiting weak access controls, they moved large sums to offshore accounts, often in jurisdictions with limited banking transparency. They manipulated transaction queues to redirect funds to their accounts. This technique allowed them to intercept money mid-transfer without triggering alarms. Transfers were disguised as routine payments for trade, salaries, or vendor services. By mimicking normal transaction patterns, they avoided detection during routine checks. Chapter 9: Laundering the Loot, Cleaning the Money. After successfully stealing millions of dollars from banks across the globe, Carbanak faced the critical challenge of laundering their ill-gotten gains. This process involved disguising the stolen money to make it appear legitimate, allowing the gang to spend or reinvest it without raising suspicion. To avoid immediate detection, Carbanak divided stolen funds into smaller amounts. Large sums were split into smaller transactions and moved to hundreds of different accounts. These accounts were often opened using fake identities or through compromised credentials stolen during phishing campaigns. Funds were transferred to accounts in multiple countries, leveraging banks in jurisdictions with lax financial regulations. This made it difficult for authorities to track the money's origin and flow. Carbanak set up fake businesses to act as fronts for laundering the money. Shell companies were registered with proper documentation, often in countries known for financial secrecy, like the British Virgin Islands or Panama. These companies had no real operations but appeared legitimate on paper. The gang generated fake invoices for services or goods that were never actually provided. Stolen funds were transferred to shell companies as payments for these fake transactions. Money sent to these companies was mixed with legitimate funds from other sources, further obscuring the trail. Cryptocurrencies played a significant role in Carbanak's laundering operations due to their anonymity and decentralization. Stolen funds were transferred to cryptocurrency exchanges, where they were converted into Bitcoin or other cryptocurrencies. Bitcoin provided anonymity, making it harder for law enforcement to trace the funds. Funds were moved through a series of cryptocurrency wallets, with each transaction further obfuscating the money's origin. Wallets were often controlled using pseudonyms, adding another layer of anonymity. Bitcoin mixing services, also known as tumblers, were used to blend stolen coins with other users' coins. This process broke the chain of transactions, making it nearly impossible to trace the stolen funds. Cryptocurrencies were used to purchase high-value items like luxury cars, real estate, or gold, which were later resold for clean money. Chapter 10. Investigators Assemble. The global response. As Carbanak's cyber heists spread across continents, leaving banks and financial institutions scrambling to recover from massive losses, the scale of the threat became clear. Early warnings came from affected banks in Eastern Europe, where anomalous withdrawals and fraudulent transfers were reported. Banks initially suspected internal errors or localized fraud, but soon realized the breaches were part of a larger, coordinated attack. Cybersecurity firms noticed similar malware signatures and tactics being used in incidents reported by different banks. This consistent pattern pointed to a single, organized group operating with a clear strategy. As the attacks continued to surface across different countries, financial regulators and law enforcement agencies called for a unified response. To address the complexity of the crimes and their international nature, Interpol and Europol took the lead in assembling a task force. Europol's European Cybercrime Center, EC3, formed a specialized team comprising experts in financial fraud, cybersecurity, and international law enforcement. Interpol brought together representatives from member countries, ensuring a global reach for intelligence sharing and coordination. Agencies combined intelligence from affected banks, cybersecurity firms, and local police investigations. Digital forensic labs, advanced analytics tools, and cyber experts were allocated to the operation. The investigation was code-named Operation Carbanak to signify its focus on dismantling the gang. Breakthrough moments. A critical breakthrough came when a Carbanak mule was arrested in Spain while withdrawing cash from an ATM. Information from the mule led to the identification of other operatives and locations used by the gang. Investigators seized servers in Eastern Europe believed to host Carbanak's command and control operations. These servers contained encrypted files, financial records, and logs of past operations. With assistance from blockchain analysis firms, investigators traced cryptocurrency transactions to accounts controlled by Carbanak. Laying the groundwork for prosecution, digital forensics teams compiled an extensive evidence repository, including malware samples, financial transaction logs, and communication records. Prosecutors worked closely with investigators to ensure evidence met legal standards for prosecution. Cases were built against identified operatives, highlighting their roles and responsibilities within the gang. Chapter 11. The Arrest. Breaking the Carbanak Chain. Identifying the leader. Over months of investigation, law enforcement agencies linked a series of IP addresses, digital wallets, and encrypted communications to an individual residing in Alicante, Spain. Financial transactions from stolen funds led to property records and a lifestyle inconsistent with declared income, further narrowing the focus to this suspect. The suspect, a Ukrainian national in his mid-30s, was known for his exceptional coding skills and deep understanding of financial systems. He lived a low-profile life, blending into the local community to avoid suspicion. Using underground forums and dark web activity, investigators uncovered aliases like Tank and Spider-Man tied to the suspect, linking him to key Carbanak operations. Planning the arrest, Europol coordinated with Spain's national police and cybersecurity experts to plan the arrest. The operation involved not just physical capture, but also securing digital evidence, including laptops, servers, and encrypted devices. Months of surveillance were conducted to confirm the suspect's daily routine, habits, and potential accomplices. Investigators tracked his movements, including trips to internet cafes and courier services suspected of being used for communication or logistics. Spanish authorities secured warrants to raid the suspect's residence and access his digital devices. Interpol issued a red notice to ensure international cooperation and backup should the suspect attempt to flee. The day of the arrest. On a quiet morning in March 2018, a team of Spanish National Police officers and Europol agents raided the suspect's home. The operation was timed to minimize the chance of the suspect destroying evidence. Investigators confiscated multiple laptops, hard drives, USB devices, and smartphones, many of which were encrypted. They also found handwritten notes, which included login credentials, server addresses, and cryptocurrency wallet keys. The suspect, caught off guard, offered little resistance during the arrest. His calm demeanor suggested confidence in the strength of his encryption tools, which investigators would later work tirelessly to bypass. Legal proceedings. The suspect was charged with multiple crimes, including cyber fraud, money laundering, and unauthorized access to financial systems. Spain coordinated with other countries affected by Carbanak's heists to share evidence and prepare for potential extradition requests. Data recovered during the arrest provided leads on other Carbanak members, servers, and mule networks. Follow-up operations were launched to capture additional suspects and dismantle remaining infrastructure. The aftermath. Learning from the heist. The Carbanak heists were a wake-up call for the global financial industry, exposing vulnerabilities in banking systems and cybersecurity practices. The scale and sophistication of the attacks led to widespread changes in how banks and institutions approach security. Immediate reactions from the banking industry. Following the exposure of the Carbanak operation, banks around the world conducted urgent security audits. Vulnerabilities in IT systems, including unpatched software and weak internal controls, were identified and prioritized for remediation. Many institutions introduced mandatory cybersecurity training for employees to recognize phishing emails, suspicious activity, and potential threats. Training modules focused on real-world examples from Carbanak to highlight the dangers of human error. Banks established dedicated incident response teams to quickly detect and mitigate ongoing cyber attacks. These teams included a mix of internal experts and external consultants specializing in digital forensics and threat intelligence. Global impact of the heist. The Carbanak case highlighted the growing threat of cybercrime to the global financial system. Governments increased funding for cybercrime task forces, and Interpol expanded its cybercrime directorate to tackle such threats more effectively. Smaller banks and financial organizations, previously seen as less likely targets, began investing in cybersecurity to avoid becoming the weak link in the system. Many partnered with larger institutions or cybersecurity firms to share resources and expertise. The public became more cautious about phishing scams and suspicious online activity. Banks launched awareness campaigns to educate customers on protecting their accounts and recognizing fraudulent schemes. The Carbanak heists transformed the global approach to cybersecurity in the financial sector. The changes made in the aftermath not only strengthened banking systems, but also set a precedent for how institutions can proactively address cybercrime. While challenges remain, the lessons learned from Carbanak continue to guide efforts to build a safer, more resilient financial ecosystem in an increasingly digital world.